Well, good morning, everyone, and this is episode 2 of Nicole Sauce's Thought of the Walk. We're on this beautiful walk with my dogs. Today, I wanted to talk about something I've been thinking about all week. I was reading an article about airborne illnesses and the definitions of airborne illnesses and what size the virus needs to be considered airborne. And it was really interesting. It's why the CDC came out and started changing some of their guidance on what they're telling people to do about the coronavirus. There's a lot of resistance to this change. Every time the CDC comes out with something, people resist. And they don't bother to look about why. And I'm with you. This has been a train wreck of a handled situation with coronavirus. You don't know who to believe. I stopped reading news about it because, something comes out and the left says blah, 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 and the right says blah, 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 and none of it's right. If you start looking at the underlying research, none of it's right. So this is a super interesting article because the group of researchers set out to figure out, okay, we're looking at this coronavirus thing. It appears to be airborne, but the size of the virus is too big to be airborne. It has to be under 5 microns to be considered airborne. But the spread sure looks like it's airborne, right? Who came up with that definition of 5 microns and why? How did they get there? That's what they just set out to do. And what they discovered was that number was not cited. It was just assumed as fact in a lot of the research studies they were finding. And over time, they finally found out, oh, you know what? It was related to some research on the ideal size of a virus to be used as a weapon. 5 microns if you want it to be airborne. But that 100 micron sized, which is bigger, viruses also spread via the air. And as they dug in more and did testing, they realized that the response to coronavirus and slowing down the spread of coronavirus was all wrong because it was probably airborne if you look at 100 microns as the measuring stick. And so they made appointments to talk to the World Health Organization and were summarily dismissed. This was early on in the pandemic, early-ish on. But they were dismissed. And then all of the policy since then has been assuming that it's spreading via droplets and wiping down surfaces. Eventually, they raised enough of a stink with their research that it has been reevaluated. People have admitted, whoops, we screwed up. And now it appears they're embracing that it is air spread. Well, what does that mean for keeping the spread from happening or protecting yourself? That's the question, right? And, you can argue whether you think it's fake or not. This is just a good question. It's a science experiment. I'm not giving recommendations here. Well, it means that if it's airborne, this whole 3-foot, 6-foot distance thing, if it stays in the air for hours after somebody's there, it doesn't matter if they're 6 feet away or 2 feet away. They're just there, right? Hey, Cece, come here. I found my dog. And it also means that you want to, if you're worried about it, the mask question. Well, a mask that filters out the size of that virus will in fact help stop the spread. Here's the problem with the masks. We're taking fabric and throwing it over our faces. That doesn't filter out shit. It doesn't. So if you're really going to take the mask approach, you need to find one that in fact will filter it out, that's small enough to filter the virus out, and they need to change it every so often. And the guidance, I think, in the medical world is about every 2 hours, and you need to not touch it, and you need to not take it off and put it on, take it off and put it on for that to be effective. Well, that changes everything, right? It also means that having a beefed up HVAC system is what you want. You want that irradiation filter or the infrared going through the air. That'll kill it. Or you want to get your HEPA filters and keep them up to date. That's more important than airflow and being outside and in general, not being in enclosed places with lots of people. That's the way that you get less exposure, but it doesn't mean you get no exposure. And I think that's the most important part of this, is we've been approaching this for months now as if we're never going to get it if we just don't get exposed to it. It's a virus. We'll probably get exposed to it. You got to work on your immune system, right? Early on in the pandemic, research, if you started digging, showed that what could help Could, not does. Vitamin D and zinc. That's a low risk thing to take. So I started doing it. But now that the research is starting to show some things about this illness, because it's been around long enough to have research, we're starting to come to conclusions that are different than assumptions that were made. And this is the important thing for you and for me and for everybody. When actual research shows some actual things, it's worth giving it pause and thinking about that and thinking, do I personally need to change what I'm doing? Rather than resist it with a religious fervor, because it's not what the assumption was earlier and you're tired of them changing your mind. Guys, science is a process. You have a hypothesis, you test the hypothesis, you publish your results, and then you let somebody else repeat the results. And if they can't repeat it, you know, that gives you a question for pause, or time for pause, right? You should question that. And I think that's where we're melting down about this. We assume every time some expert comes out and says the research says blah, that's the final word. There's no final word. This thing's only like a year old or so, a little over a year. We don't know. 20 years from now, we might know. But it hasn't had the time to go through all that much research. And at the end of the day, I think we should be living our lives. That's what I'm doing. I hope you are too. Make it a great day, week, month, year.